Hello, welcome back. So today I am continuing my shelf tour, and these are mostly paperbacks which have been sitting uh, like this on my shelves for quite some time. And I thought that I would do that today as a way to shift into the remainder of the fiction, which is going to be pretty much entirely paperbacks. There are a few hardcover books that I forgot to mention, which were on the back shelf of this coffee table. Like it's a two-level coffee table, and there's uh, row of books on the front, which are like reference books, and then on the back I had some fiction, which I just didn't have room for on the other shelves. And the whole point of this tour, I haven't read any of these books. The point of this tour is not to show off my books or to brag about the books that I have. The point is to take them off the shelf, see what I have, uh, remember what I have, and maybe get encouraged to read some of these books. And I'm trying to scale back book buying. Like, I'm trying to stop buying so many books and to look at what I have, maybe see that I am not as interested in some of these books as I used to be, and perhaps pass them on to someone else. But actually, I think that this has been a really good thing. And as I have been doing this shelf tour, I have actually read quite a few books that I have talked about in my previous shelf tour videos. So that has been really nice. It has been really nice to in a way, it's like shopping my shelves, I guess, but a bit more intensive. And the other point of this is for you to see the books that I have and perhaps give me some recommendations. If you've read these books before, if you've read these authors before, you can give me some recommendations. You can say that book was great, or you should try this book by that person, or that book was terrible, stay away from it, and here's the reasons why. And let's just get into this. So the first books I'm going to start with are all Signet Classics. I really like the Signet Classics paperback line. They have these really nice covers. So here we go. The first is Main Traveled Roads by Hamlin Garland. And from what I understand, he was from the Midwest and he moved away to Boston. So this would have been in the 1800s. I think it was Boston he moved to. And then he moved back to the Midwest and he wrote these stories. They are about farming and life on these farms out in the middle of nowhere all by yourself, and just how hard that was, how difficult it was for this lifestyle, depending on the weather and all that sort of stuff, and being poor. And I've really been meaning to read this, but this is one of those books that uh, seems like it might be really hard to read, actually, emotionally devastating or whatever, or just painful to read. The next is White Jacket by Herman Melville. So I read Moby Dick and I really enjoyed it. I don't think I've read anything else by Herman Melville though. So I do have a couple of these books. The next is one of my favorite covers of all these Signet Classics. Actually, these next two I really like, and they're both by Sinclaire Lewis. So the first is Main Street, and I love this cover. This is one of my favorite paperback covers ever, and it's one of these wraparound covers. I won't push it too hard because it'll crack. I have been meaning I've been meaning to read Main Street a long time. I'm just going to not say that from here on out because it's true for a lot of these books. The next is Elmer Gantry. I don't really know anything about this except for it's about a preacher and he gets into trouble somehow, or maybe he's fraudulent or something like that. I'm not sure. The next is Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. I really haven't read very much by Conrad besides Heart of Darkness, and I read one of those like illustrated classics versions of Lord Jim a while back. And the next is The Jungle by Upton Sinclaire, which I imagine this is pretty gross, and that's why I haven't ever tried to read it. I often confuse Upton Sinclaire with Sinclair Lewis and vice versa. So this is about an immigrant worker working in the slaughterhouses, I think, of Chicago, and yeah, I just don't think I'm ready for that. I just don't think no. So, since there is a pretty big pile here, I'm not going to talk too much about these books as we go along. The next is The Bridge on the Drina by Ivo Andric. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. The next is A Separate Piece by John Knowles. I have read a little bit about this on Goodreads and that sort of thing, and from what I understand, people either really, really like this book or they don't like this book at all, and I'm not really sure why. If you know, I would love to hear it. The next is a big historical novel by Kenneth Roberts. This is Arundel. Let's see what it says here. This stirring saga of Benedict Arnold's fateful expedition into Canada is a breathtaking recreation of that memorable campaign. So I've only read one book by Kenneth Roberts, but I have quite a few of them. And I really liked the one that I read. It was about some guys who shipwreck on this little bitty rock island, and they eventually have to resort to cannibalism. The next is The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. Never read anything by Simone de Beauvoir. It's always been rather a daunting task. She liked to write really long books and that sort of thing, so I have just never gotten around to it. I think there's 3 stories in that book. Briefing for a Descent into Hell by Doris Lessing. I've read the first 5 or 6 pages of this multiple times, and I just never felt like going deeper into it, at least not yet. So it is about a man who has a breakdown, and we follow from in his mind, and he's having this really serious breakdown. I'm not sure where that goes, but it can't be anywhere good for him. I've always found this next one kind of neat because it complements a Bantam Books Incorporated from the 7th World Fantasy Convention, October 30th to November 1st, 1981. This is probably one of the most well-known horror anthologies ever. This is Dark Forces. So on the back here, we have stories from Stephen King, T.E.D. Klein, Ray Bradbury, Ramsey Campbell, Robert Bloch, Dennis Etchison, Charles L. Grant, Edward Gorey, Richard Matheson, and Richard Christian Matheson, Theodore Sturgeon, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Clifford D. Simic, Joyce Carol Oates, Carl Edward Wagner, Lisa Tuttle, Robert Aikman, Joe Haldeman, Gene Wolfe, Russell Kirk. I skipped quite a few names there, so I have read the majority of this book, and if you ever see this, pick it up. It's really good if you're into that sort of thing. The next is an anthology with 3 different writers in it, with an introduction by Douglas E. Winter. This is The Skin Trade with Stephen King, Dan Simmons, and George R.R. Martin. So what do we have here? What are the stories? I read a couple of these. I think there are quite a few stories in this, actually. So there's 3 by Stephen King, 3 by Dan Simmons, and 1 by George R.R. Martin, which is The Skin Trade. From King, we have The Reploid, Sneakers, and Dedication. I like Sneakers a lot. Then we have Dan Simmons, Metastasis, Vanni Fucci is Alive and Well and Living in Hell, which is actually a really good story about a guy who comes back from hell, and it takes place on this TV show, and like everybody starts turning into these creatures from hell. And Iverson's Pits. If I remember right, Iverson's Pits is a story about the Civil War. I don't remember exactly. The next is one I got, and I haven't looked at it at all. It was really cheap. It came out of somebody's attic or shed. It smells really bad. And I got a whole heap of books. They were all from the 90s, like horror novels from the 90s and horror collections from the 90s that I had never heard of. I had heard of this one, but it's not in good shape, but it is Houses Without Doors by Peter Straub. And I heard someone talk about this not long ago, and they said they really liked this. I have never been a big fan of Peter Straub, to be honest. I read Coco and Ghost Story and something else, and I don't know, there was just something about his writing that just didn't really click with me. Like I appreciated what he was doing, but it just didn't. Coco in particular, I just didn't really care for. After that is Whispers. This is another horror anthology. This one is edited by Stuart David Schiff. And let's see who is in this one. Carl Edward Wagner, David Drake, Fritz Leiber, Robert Bloch, or is it Leiber? Fritz Leiber, Robert Bloch, William F. Nolan, U.B. Cave, Dennis Etchison, Richard Christian Matheson, Ray Russell, Brian Lumley. I have to skip some people. Robert Aikman, again, Manly Wade Wellman, and Ramsey Campbell. I did skip quite a few stories. This is also quite good. So after that, we have kind of a weird transition, I guess, but this is the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I've always wanted to read the Silmarillion. I've always wanted to get around to reading it someday. I think I may read this one chapter at a time in the way that I read The Lord of the Rings earlier this year. Now this one one of the reasons I've never read this is because it has this terrible, like, paperback, like that mildew smell, but it can't really be mildewed, because I remember when this was brand new, and it's had this smell, and it smells terrible, and it's just not at all conducive to reading, so I keep meaning to replace that. The next is The Promise by Chaim Potok, and this is a sequel to The Chosen, which I really liked. The Chosen. I thought that was a really good book. Next is by E.L. Doctorow. This is World's Fair. And I think I remember Michael Romeo talking about E.L. Doctorow's World's Fair and how much he really liked it. And I have never read anything by Doctorow, but I do hear people every now and then say that they like Doctorow's work. This is A Bloody Field by Shrewsbury by Edith Pargeter, who also writes as Ellis Peters. And this is a medieval historical novel about the battle at Shrewsbury, I suppose. I don't really know a whole lot about it. I have read several of Ellis Peters' books. She wrote the Brother Cadfael stories, right? I think so. I sometimes get her mixed up with Elizabeth Peters, but their writing styles are quite different. And in fact, one time I tried to read a book by Elizabeth Peters without realizing. I thought I was reading an Ellis Peters book, and I was like, this is very, very different. Next is The Crucible by Arthur Miller. This is one of the books that I have had for the longest time. I have had this at least since 2001, somewhere in there, long time. After that is A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, which I just love this cover. This is also one of my favorite covers. I just think that is fantastic. And the back is kind of bland, but look. And I tried to read Robinson Crusoe once, and I think I made it halfway through, but I was in my teens at the time, so I might get along with Defoe better now. This is The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope, and I meant to read this. Michael K. Vaughan did a read-along of this, or a book club reads with this a couple of years ago, and I meant to join him for that, and I just didn't. I'm not very good at joining in events and things like that, unfortunately. I sometimes wish that I was, but I'm just such a random reader. Here we have Other Voices, Other Rooms by Truman Capote. And there is Truman Capote on the back. These, I think, are also short stories. I have never read anything by Capote. And I've watched quite a few interviews with Capote from over the years, and I just have never got around to reading one of his books. That is Youth and the Bright Medusa by Willa Cather. So these are all stories. And I really do like Willa Cather's books. They are very far from what I generally tend to read, so I don't read them very often, but I've always liked the ones that I have read, so I don't know why I haven't read these. And I don't know, I like this cover. I like the way that it was. It looks very like 70s or late 60s. What year is this from? This is from 1975, yeah. But the trouble with this one is that it is broken. Like, it does have a broken spine, and I don't know if it'll survive a read. The last paperback is The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers, maybe Childers. I did try to read this one time, and I didn't make it very far into it. It was very, I guess it's Edwardian, right? And I don't know, I just wasn't feeling it at that time. So. Now the next is very different. And this is the only example of a book like this that I actually have, but I would really like to have others, actually. This is a puzzle book by Victoria Hancock. This is Night Shift. So, what's it say? Choose your path and face the consequence. I'll read you the back here. I've tried this several times. It says, welcome to the night shift. Normally, you turn up at the hospital at 9 p.m. and prepare to face whatever comes through the door. You patched up gunshot wounds, plated broken bones, and drained abscesses. Sometimes you've spent the entire night watching TV, feeling bored and just willing the phone to ring, waiting for something to happen. But what if something did happen? What would you do if your ordinary routine just turned upside down? In this adventure, you are not a hero. You're just a hospital worker who's caught up in the middle of your worst nightmare. Will you be able to use your wits and survive? We'll see you on the other side. And this is a lot of fun. And you start off at number 1, and then you choose like which page to go to. And they're all scattered throughout this book. And you encounter some really weird people. You encounter some things that are not people. And all the time you are being chased by some kind of like terrible creature. I'm not entirely sure what it is. And I have multiple times tried this And I always forget, like, I need to sit down and write out which numbers I go through so that I can backtrack. I'm always getting, like, eaten by some creature or, like, killed in some terrible machine or something like that. So this is a lot of fun. I might try that again after this. Now, the next books are all by, these are the hardcovers I was talking about that I had on this shelf over here. So these are all by Stephen King and his son, Joe Hill. It has been a long time since I have read a Stephen King book that was new to me. And I don't know what it is, but about 10 years ago, I just lost almost all interest in reading new Stephen King books. And I often will read like his short stories from the 70s and 80s, or every now and then I'll go back and read a novel of his. But I just really lost interest in reading other books by King. I think there are multiple reasons for that. I read The Dark Tower. I read like all of The Dark Tower, and then I read The Tommyknockers. And I think that just like short-circuited my desire to read more books by King. So I think this book in my hand is actually the one that put my dad off reading Stephen King forever, because this was his copy. And I think he thought it was really weird and didn't get it. And this is his old book. This is a first trade printing from October of 1996. It's The Regulators, right? And I never have read The Regulators, but I read the other one. Like, this is, it's kind of hard to explain what it is, but there's like two books and they parallel each other somehow. And this one parallels, what is the other book? Desperation. Desperation. I remembered it. I didn't see it. And Desperation is just a really odd book. I guess it's not really, but it's about some people who are in this desert town and they start getting chased by this sheriff who's having like a breakdown. And it was just, I should probably read Desperation again. Like, I don't think I would enjoy it, to be honest, but I would like to read it again as an adult and see why I didn't like it when I was in my teens. Now, this next one, my grandma gave me this, and I just never got around to reading it. So this is also probably a first edition. Yeah, it's a first Scribner hardcover edition from January 2008. This is Duma Key. And I don't know, I just never have had much interest in reading Duma Key, and just never got around to it. We have Just After Sunset, and I've read several of these stories, and I liked some of them. I liked some of them much better than I liked others, and I still need to finish this. So we are currently in the middle of short story summer, so that would probably be a good time to finish the last 4 stories. The Gingerbread Girl, Ayana, A Very Tight Place. Oh, so there's only 3 stories I haven't read, apparently. The rest is notes. So, anyway, I liked some of these anyway. The last of Stephen King's are Hearts in Atlantis. And I think is this also stories, or is this one big novel? I'm not sure. I think this is the last Stephen King book that I actually bought, like, that I hadn't read. I've bought a few since then, but I think this is the last one that I hadn't read when I bought it. And it just, like I said, I just completely lost interest in reading Stephen King books that were new to me. This is also a book, and this is the last book. This is one that my grandma got me also. This is Horns by Joe Hill. And I have never had an interest in reading this book. My grandma gave it to me, so I have kept it, but I've just never had any interest in reading it. I did read a collection of Joe Hill's stories a while back, and I really actually enjoyed most of them, although, to be fair, a lot of his stories seem to hinge on like the twist ending or the like violent ending, and I don't know, it just didn't really work for me overall as a collection, but I liked individual stories, so who knows. If you've read this, let me know if it's any good. I've heard people say they like it and people say they don't like it. I have to be honest and say I just really don't have much interest in reading this, so I probably actually won't get around to reading it. And I may even wind up putting it on the sell pile, who knows, because I've had it since it was new. Is this also a first edition? If it's not a first edition, it's very close to it. Yes, this is a first edition of Horns. So that brings us to the end of this particular shelf tour. I can't remember which part this is now. I think this is like the 10th one. Now, in my last shelf tour video, I mentioned this shelf right here and how I'm probably not going to do it again. These are my unread Penguin and Oxford World Classics. And the reason I'm not going to do this shelf again is because I made a video about this shelf about a year and a half ago, and the books are really pretty much the same. Now, I remember I had a really hard time filming that video, so I can't vouch for how good it is. I remember having a bad time filming it, but then the end product came out much better than I thought it would. So I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description of this video if you want to see that. So after that, now you can't see them, but right over here, there are two shelves of paperbacks. It's one shelf, but I have used a board and like some old plastic containers and made two shelves on one shelf. So we're going to go into the paperbacks after that. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today. Like I said, I would love to hear your thoughts on these books if you've read them before, if you've read some of these authors that I haven't, and that would be wonderful. And I want to thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.